Thank you very much for having us. As you said, I've used dbt almost for as long as it's existed. It's the way Josh and I met each other. I think we've taken a lot of inspiration from how dbt has built its product, having a kind of an open core model. And so we're really excited to talk with all of you. What we're going to focus on today is our integration with dbt. So Spectacles is a much broader tool. Josh will talk a little bit about an overview of the tool more generally. And then what I'm going to do is we'll spend most of the time in a demo really walking you through how you can set this up, how you can test dbt with Spectacles, and then leave a ton of time for Q&A. And we want to hear from all of you and understand what questions you have and all of that. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Josh, who's going to go through the slides initially.
All right, awesome. Thanks everybody for being here. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Looker because Spectacles is fundamentally a tool for testing LookML. And drop in the Slack channel if you have some guesses here. We've got a lot of data on LookML pull requests that we've tested with Spectacles, about 3,000 pull requests actually. What percentage of them do you think have SQL, data test, or content errors? Just stick some guesses in Slack.
People don't have a ton of confidence in Looker developers, clearly.
Yeah, you get paid to do this. 80% of your pull requests have errors. What are we paying you for? Quite a range of guesses here. So
yeah, sorry, I think the chat is disabled, so probably.
Oh yeah, the dbt Labs folks have set up a Slack channel in the dbt Labs workspace called How To Hours with today's date, and you can chat via there.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. No problem. So the actual number is 35%, so not quite 80%, but it's still a lot. And I think we all know this as people who develop in Looker and in dbt, that we make mistakes. We're humans, and there's a lot of complexity in the way that data works, and we may not always be able to anticipate the effect of the work that we do. And Dylan and I realized that this was a problem, and it's not really something that Looker checks for. Of course, you can go into the content validator, or you can go into the Explore page, and you can run all of these tests, but it's something you have to do on your own and you have to remember to do, and you may not do it correctly or all of the time. And so in thinking about what the solution to that is, we really looked at the software engineering world where this idea of continuous integration or automated testing is really common. And if you're not familiar with that concept, it looks something like this. So you have a person who's developing in Looker, in this case, they're developing LookML, and she pushes her changes up to a remote repository like GitHub. And she opens a pull request because she wants to merge her changes into production. And normally she would rely on code review. Maybe another person from her team comes and takes a look and catches an error or points out something that she could have done differently, but they might not catch everything. And if they don't, then this gets deployed to production with all the consequences of any potential errors in the code that she's developed. And so in the case of continuous integration, which is what Spectacles is for, Spectacles will run a bunch of tests on her code and check to make sure, hey, is the SQL that she's put into her LookML valid? Are any of her dashboards going to potentially break from this change? Is this invalidating any of the assumptions in her data tests? And if those tests fail, she's notified of that before it's merged. She can go and fix those issues on her development branch. She can push them back up, and the process restarts. And eventually, she's going to get to a state in which everything is passing, her code looks clean and ready to merge, and she can merge those changes with confidence, knowing that they're not going to impact her downstream users or cause any problems. And so that at a high level is what Spectacles does. So Spectacles those tests can be kicked off in a number of different ways. So we support the kind of naive case, which is the LookML pull request, but everything from manually to schedules to what Dylan will be spending a lot of time on today, which is with dbt Cloud as well. And so these triggers all are connected to a suite, which is, if you're a dbt Cloud user, it's the same idea as a dbt Cloud job. It's some config that tells Spectacles what kinds of tests you want to run and what they should be run on. And then the suite will launch certain validators. So we have 3 validators right now. We have the SQL validator, which basically asks, does the SQL defined in my LookML actually run in my data warehouse? And it will run some lightweight queries for each dimension. Then there's the content validator, which runs Looker's content validator, but allows you to do things like excluding content in personal spaces, or only returning the errors that are incremental to the work that you've developed and not just everything that's already existing in production. And then lastly, you can use Looker data tests, which allow you to define more complex assertions and make sure that those are passing as well. So at a high level, we're triggering some tests. We're running different types of tests on our lookup. And yeah, I guess we're not done yet, but I'll hand it over to Dylan now, and he's going to show you hands-on how this actually looks.
Perfect. Thank you, Josh. Let me share my screen. Can you all see that? Some thumbs up. Yes. Cool. Perfect. So this is what the Spectacles platform looks like. And so what I'm going to talk about quickly in this demo is just show you at a high level what a non-DBT run looks like, just to give you some context of how Spectacles works, and walk through exactly what Josh has just talked about. And then what we'll really dig into is the DBT use case. And as Josh said, what Spectacles does is connects to your Looker instance and runs a series of diagnostic checks, most often on Looker pull request, but also on a scheduled basis or manually, whenever you want to kick them off, that check the health of your code and of your Looker instance at that point in time, and stops you from merging in bad code into your Looker instance. And so we do that all via the Looker API. So when you set up the platform, you will give us the API credentials for a dedicated user in Looker, and we will run everything through that. We don't connect directly to your database. We don't want to connect directly to your database. We never see any data from your database. Spectacles is really secure and does everything through Looker, and we sit on top of Looker's security model to do that. And as Josh said, you have a suite. This is the configuration of a suite. And I won't spend too much time here for the moment, but really all is to say that you can enable your 3 validators with some different configuration. And what I'm going to do just to show what happens is kick one off manually. So I'm going to create a run, and I'm going to say, okay, let's test Looker in production and run all our tests. And so what's happening now is Spectacles is going to take those API credentials we gave it, take the configuration of the suite, and run a whole bunch of tests against your Looker instance. And for example, for the SQL validator, which is the one that most people come to us for initially, and also the one that is most relevant to your DBT changes. What that is doing is checking that all of your SQL in your LookML, whether that's a column name, a table name, SQL syntax in a derived table, SQL syntax in a dimension, that all of that will run successfully. And so we do that by running really lightweight queries through Looker against your warehouse. And so if you come here, you can see in our queries, you don't normally need to look at this, but it helps illustrate the point. What you can see is what we've done is we've gone to every Explorer in the project. We have grabbed every dimension in every Explorer, and we've run it in one really large query. So what that tells us is, hey, does this Explorer have at least one SQL error or not? And that gives us the first indication of, hey, is there more to investigate here? Because database is only going to return the first error, all we know at this point is, hey, is there an error or not in this Explorer? And some of you might be thinking, well, that looks like a pretty intensive query. Like, how do you make sure this runs performantly? And the way we do that is a combination of a where false here. Actually, let me zoom in a little. A where false and a limit 0 ensures that this takes almost no time at all. So you can see, even though we've grabbed about 70 dimensions, there was 4 joins, this query takes about 1.5 seconds. What then happens is, if this Explorer had returned an error, we would run the same query, but dimension by dimension, to explain to ascertain exactly which dimensions have an error. So if there were multiple runs that had an error, we would have found them, and you would get a report that looks, I'm going to go find a Looker pull request one before all of our testing. Something like this. And so you get a report that says, hey, in the Credentials Explorer, there are 2 dimensions that have a problem. Here's the database error that gets returned when we try to run this query. So this is something that a user would see if this code were to be merged. Here's the database error that they get, that big red box that happens at the top of an Explorer and Looker if you've ever pushed something or written LookML that is at all off. And then what we do is link you directly to the LookML or to Explore from here so that people can resolve it. And so that was the first version of Spectacles, was, hey, we're not going to focus on DBT yet. We're just going to make sure that as you open a Looker pull request or you're using Looker day to day, that nothing's going to break. And so this would have run on a Looker pull request and on a scheduled basis for most people. And you get this result very similar to DBT Cloud. You get a status in GitHub that says, hey, don't merge this pull request. There's something wrong with it. And you then prompts you to resolve it. And so that is the kind of core functionality that Spectacles had before the DBT integration. Now, what we always had in mind and really wanted to focus on after we built this was, hey, there's really two things that can break your Looker instance. There is either a change to your LookML, which is what we covered to begin with, or, and maybe harder to manage still, is a change to your database. Your Looker developer can go in and manually test something, understand, like there's a lot of stuff to manually test and it is error prone, as Josh said. Maybe you can manage it. It's really easy to make a change to DBT that breaks Looker because you rename a column, you rename a table, you change a data type, you change how a metric is calculated, whatever it is. It's just really hard to know. When I add this extra column in the staging model in DBT, is there a downstream impact on that in Looker? Am I going to break and explore? Am I changing a metric? Is a database error going to happen? And that fundamentally is what we try to solve with the DBT integration. And so there's a couple parts to this. We can do this both with DBT Cloud, and if you're using the CLI through something like GitHub Actions or Circle CI or whatever it might be, and I'll talk through both of those. But before we get there, I want to talk about some of the prerequisites here. So the way we run this integration at its core is we ask you, either through DBT Cloud or something else, to generate a staging data set every time you open a DBT pull request. Now, if you're using DBT Cloud, that's pretty much what it would do by default. It would run DBT run or whatever other commands you give it into a schema like DBT Cloud PR 835860, which is a unique data set schema or data set in your data warehouse for that pull request. And what's great about that, by generating this staging data set that is representative of your DBT code at that point in time, is that we can then run all of our Spectacles tests, but not against your production data, but against that staging data. So instead of running the queries that we've run here, that's our job, give me a sec. There we go. So instead of running this to check it, and you'll see here when Looker catches up with me, that what we're querying is analytics. We basically want to run the same test, but against DBT Cloud PR 835860, which is where that DBT data has been generated. Because what we can then tell you is, hey, look, you know that this code change isn't breaking DBT. DBT Cloud is doing its job. DBT CLI and Circle is doing its job. It's telling you that internal to DBT, you haven't broken any of the logic there. But what you don't know at that point is whether it's going to break something in Looker. And what Spectacles does by running queries, by changing this schema value or this database value, it's totally configurable to how you want it to be done. But by changing that, we can tell you, look, this code is fine for DBT, but it's going to break Looker. You probably weren't aware of that. And if you merge this code and it gets run in production, you're going to have some analyst or some CT, like CMO, whomever it is in your company, come knock on your door and say, hey guys, Looker's broken, something has happened, and you're going to have to go and fix it. And we want to make sure that, one, their confidence is never eroded in your data. You guys, everyone does a ton of work to get this stuff, and Spectacles just sits on top of that and helps you do that more effectively and make sure that no errors slip through. So, which leads to the question, well, how do you tell Looker to use this other data set? How does it know how to override that? Because that's not functionality that is native to Looker. And the way it works is with user attributes. So for those of you who aren't familiar with user attributes, are a way of setting kind of a configuration on a user by user basis in Looker and have it be used in the code in some way. And so what you can see here, and let me zoom in a little more here, is instead of having Spectacles UI prod analytics.dim organizations, dim organizations is a model built by DBT. Instead of having those values hard coded, we ask you to put user attributes here that say, hey, when we want the ability to set that user attribute on a user so that they can query some other data set. So for all of your users, they will almost always have the default value here. But what it empowers Spectacles to do is say, let's go run those same checks that we were doing. But instead of using our production data, let's go and use that staging data. Let's go and insert DBT Cloud PR 835860 here and have it do its thing. And so from there, there's really only a couple final steps you need to do to get this testing working. The first is you need to come into your Spectacle settings and you need to tell us what the default values are. Because we're going to update these, we need to know what to reset them to. And so what you're going to come in here, and so we use BigQuery here. And so project, for those of you who use something else, is the equivalent of database. Data set is the equivalent of schema. And what we're saying is, hey, we don't specify otherwise. Go and use these values, which are actually the defaults in Looker as well. So go and test our production data unless we specify otherwise. But what that allows us to do once you've done this is give you the ability to override those on a run-by-run basis. And so we can do something like this. And so I'm just going to, as an example here, this is if you did it manually, I'm going to come and say, I'm doing my work in dbt Dylan. I want to check if dbt Dylan, if the data that's in dbt Dylan is compatible with Looker. So I've done dbt run locally. And what you're going to see is we're going to store that value on the run. And in a second, we're going to see a bunch of queries all using my data set. Let's come back here. Just going to check in on Slack to see if we have any questions so far. No, I think we're good. Just love for our graphics in the presentation. And so I think these are the most recent ones. And there you go. And so you can see that Spectacles has run all the same tests, but it's now pointed to my dbt Dylan data set and lets me know, yep, Dylan, what you were developing, you're good to go. But all that is good for is for me to know personally that I've done it. We want that to be not manual and automated and visible on the pull request so that everyone can see it. As I said, what's really great about dbt Cloud is dbt Cloud does a lot of this for you. It will, on pull request, if you tell it to, run all of your commands and do it in a dbt Cloud PR schema. And so we can just piggyback off that. And so what I'll do now is I'll show the actual implementation first with dbt Cloud, and then secondly, if you're using something like Circle or GitHub Actions to run your dbt checks. So what you can do is you go into your suite and you'll see you have a couple options.
Maybe before we jump into that, should we take a break for questions?
Yeah, does anyone have anything either in Slack or, well, actually drop them in Slack if you have any questions and we can answer anything. Want to make sure we've got everyone with us before we continue on to the next bit.
Yeah, something I wanted to add real quick is like we gather some interesting data about the errors that people tend to find in Looker, and almost overwhelmingly the most common error that you get in LookML from a SQL standpoint is like wrong column name, wrong table name. And so much of that comes from the transformation layer. So just like driving home the importance of doing this so that when you are changing your data warehouse, that Looker's staying up to date with that and staying in sync.
I'm curious to see like what the errors look like. Maybe you could cover that later.
Yeah, well, once I run through the first example, I'll be able to show you what some of those look like.
Yeah. Hi, Dylan.
Any other questions before we continue? I don't see any in Slack. I think we're good to go there.
Cool.
Awesome. So let's talk through the dbt Cloud integration. So the dbt Cloud integration is really simple. The first thing you do, actually, and I skipped, is you'd connect to GitHub. So we have a GitHub application. You'd come in here, really takes 2 seconds, just does a OAuth handshake with GitHub and lets us connect and do the relevant things to your GitHub repo. And this, it really in the exact same way that dbt Cloud does. And from there, we just need a few bits of information from you. You'll come in here and you'll click, hey, I want to run this test suite on pull request from dbt Cloud. And so what we need from you is, hey, where is your dbt repo? Where do you want what do you want to trigger these tests? What is your dbt Cloud job ID that runs your CI checks in dbt Cloud? And we need this because it is part of what makes up the schema name that dbt creates for you. And then finally, what is the user attribute in Looker that controls the schema, which is basically saying, hey, what should we override on each run when we kick off these dbt Cloud checks? And from there, you just develop as you normally would. So if I come back here into my LookML, I'm going to show you my dim organizations view again. Look, we're struggling here today. Cool. And we can see things like, hey, we have dimensions called count projects and count runs that pull from 2 columns from our dim organizations view that are called count projects and count runs. And those are equal, those come from the column references in this dbt model. So I'm in my corresponding dbt model here called dim organizations. And we can see here at the bottom that we declare count projects and count runs. And so that's those columns that are referenced in LookML are the output of this model in dbt. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this file. And so I'm going to go in, and maybe I'm unaware of what's being used in Looker. And I've decided that I would rather these columns be called number of projects and number of runs instead of count projects and count runs. Now, this is a change that isn't going to break Looker. Isn't going to break dbt. dbt Cloud is going to tell you, you know what, internal to dbt, this still works. Your model still runs, all of your tests pass, you're good to go. But prior to Spectacles, what you'd be unaware of possibly, particularly if you have a large team or a distributed team, or you split dbt and Looker across data engineers and analytics engineers or whatever it might be, they may be unaware of the fact that this is going to break a whole bunch of explorers in Looker. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new branch and propose that change and open a pull request in the way that Josh outlined in his original presentation. And so we can see the change here, just renaming these columns. Ignore the circle CI step for the moment, because we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. We'll focus on the dbt Cloud version first. And so what you can see here is in a second, dbt Cloud is going to pick up this pull request, know that it needs to test it, as it just has, and it's going to run the commands that we have told it to do on every pull request to tell us whether something is breaking. This is a small demo project, and so in our case, that is just dbt seed and dbt run. But what is interesting as it reloads, just take a second, is it's going to do that in a schema called dbt Cloud PR, and then the job ID, which is 8358, and then the pull request number, which in this case is 63. So you can see here, it is overriding in our profile dbt Cloud PR 835863. And so that's where dbt Cloud is going to go and put this data. And so as we jump into the dbt run step, and even the dbt seed step, you can see that's where everything is being generated. And so all of that passes, and dbt sends a status back to GitHub that says, yep, all good here. Everything on the dbt side is good to go. And what that immediately kicks off with the Spectacles integration is it tells Spectacles, okay, everything in dbt passes, go and check the Looker side. Go and use that data that we've just generated and check if anything is going to break in Looker before you even merge in this code. And so if we go to the Spectacles run here, you can see that on the dataset value, we've got that value inserted from the pull request. And what we can see, if I scroll down to queries, is we're now testing against that data set. It's actually queuing behind the circle CI run. So we'll give both of those a second, but we'll see both of them kicking off. And so what you can see here is we've run all of these same tests. We've grabbed every column again, but this time, this is actually from the circle CI side. So this is a slightly different structure of schema, but that's what it's running against. And so we're getting the failures there. And what's going to happen now, which is exactly what's just kicked off, is for the explorers that had a failure, it is going to run it dimension by dimension. So basically the same idea, where false, limit 0, but one dimension at a time. Because what we want you to get isn't just, hey, this explorer is broken. We want to be able to tell you, you have broken this specific bit of LookML. You've broken these dimensions in these explorers. Here's the line where you can go and fix it. Or, as is often the case, maybe revert your change or make your change in dbt compatible with Looker so that it's an easier lift. But it's up to you how you resolve that from there. And we can talk a little bit more about that in a second. And so these will all run in a second. And Makoto, to your question, we'll see in a second the way that the report comes through. So we'll wait for these. And so what you can see, this is on BigQuery, but it applies the same on Snowflake or Redshift. All of these take a second or less, basically. So we can run a ton of tests really performantly without impacting other usage in Looker or increasing kind of data warehouse bills anywhere. What's very cool about this implementation is on BigQuery in particular, where you're charged per table scan, the limit 0 removes any table scan from your query. And so these are entirely free from a BigQuery point of view. So there's really no cost implications here for adding this step to your CI jobs. So it's just running the final tests now, and in a second, I'm actually going to come out here. We'll see exactly what's happened. And so this is the one that was actually kicked off by Circle CI, but we'll have the same results as the one that would have come from dbt Cloud. It's just the order that they've run it. And so what you can see here is, hey, our dbt changes are actually going to break something in Looker. This isn't a change, as dbt told me, that is totally, innocent. There's an implication here that if we merge this in, is going to have a downstream impact on people's existing reports. If they had a report that used this query, the next time they went to run it, it was going to break, and you were going to get notified that says, there's something wrong with this report. I think Looker's down, or I think Looker's down, because they don't understand. Most people don't fully internalize what the warehouse is or what dbt is. So it's always, I think Looker is broken. Can you go have a look? I need this for a meeting in an hour. And this really just helps you avoid that. And so what you can see here is exactly what's happening. And so this is telling you in this Explorer, in the web application model, in the credentials Explorer, the count projects and the count runs dimensions are broken. And as Josh said, it's basically just telling you, we can't find those columns. We're looking for those columns in your table, and they're not there. What you can do from here is either open up a corresponding Looker pull request to resolve these, that makes the corresponding change, or depending on how much you care about it being named one way or the other in Looker, fix your Looker pull request such that it won't break Looker in the first place. And so let me come back to the pull request and update here. So you can see that actually the spectacles one's still running because it was stuck behind this circle step. But you can do all of this without dbt Cloud. So we love dbt Cloud. It's what we use at Spectacles. It's super easy to deploy, makes using all of this really easy, and really makes setting up this integration take all of about 5 minutes. But a lot of people have a need to run the CLI themselves. They want to use a bit of dbt functionality, or want it to be more extensible, or do something specific that means that you're not going to opt for using dbt Cloud. And you might be using something like Circle CI or GitHub Actions to run these as well. And so we support that as well through our API. So I'm just going to come and open these two files and basically show you what we do here. And so this is a Circle CI config file, but really this would be exactly the same as GitHub Actions, GitLab CI, Jenkins. They all work pretty much the same. And so, yes, let me zoom in. Thank you. And we really do the exact same thing. We have in our job a step here that installs dbt, does some stuff around environment variables, but then really just runs dbt deps, dbt seed, dbt run. And you can see actually from, let me go back one, that in our profiles that we use for this, we basically just generate a schema based on the Git SHA, on the Git commit. And so we generate, again, a unique schema or data set for each commit. And so we have examples of this for a bunch of different CI systems. So our clients, our customers use a range of them. We actually have some people on here, I think some of the team from Dutchy, who have built their own kind of way of doing this, but it's really simple. So this is, let's call it 20 lines of code to do the dbt step. And then if the dbt step passes, we run this small Python file. We basically do some kind of pip install stuff, some environment configuration, and then just run a really short Python file here. And all it really does is say, hey, let's go get our API key. Let's go get the Git SHA. These are our org IDs within Spectacles. Go and create a run, and then just wait for the result, pull for the result. And so what you can see here in the API call that we're making, we pass the org ID, the suite ID, and the project ID. And we basically say, hey, go and update dbt dataset to what we know the schema name to be. So this is replicating exactly how the dbt Cloud integration works, just on the Circle side. And so you can create a run via Circle CI for this, and then just wait for the result and pass the exit status the same. And we make these available. So if anyone ever wanted to use these, we will just, they're publicly available in our docs and things like that. And so what you can see if we jump into Circle is a couple things. So I'm going to go to test all. We can see the dbt test pass, everything's running, and it's generating it in dbt CI 3A, 3CA4, which is the first 6 digits of the commit SHA. And so that all passes fine. And so it goes to the next step and then says, okay, let's go and run Spectacles. And all of your lovely faces are in the way, but there we go. And so you can see that we're just running this script, and it will exit with a bad exit code if we have an error, and it just links you directly to the results. So I'm going to open that link. We can see that same schema here and the results for it. And so again, legitimate reasons why you might not want to use dbt cloud. This is very easy to do with the API using something like Circle, GitHub Actions. You get the exact same report. These two reports, they look a little different just because one was triggered from the API and one was triggered via the native dbt integration, but really the results contained within them are exactly the same. And that at its core is how the dbt integration works. The one bit that we're going to be pushing over the next month or so is the ability on the pull request to say, look, I have opened a corresponding Looker pull request that resolves this change. Go and test them together. Now you can do that today manually in the UI, and I'll show you that in a second, but that'll become, what I'm about to show will become even more automated than it already is. And so if I go and open a pull request, come on, Looker.
Is Looker down?
No, it's good. It's just, turns out internet when you're up in rural Quebec is not what it could be.
Looker must be down.
And so let's go into dev mode. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new branch here. We know that master is clean. I'm going to go and change those two things. So I'm going to make this number of projects and number of runs. I'm going to validate my lookml. I'm going to commit my change for dbt changes. What I'm then going to do is I'm going to go and kick off a run inspectable. So I'm going to say, all right, let's run our dbt job. Let's check our SQL. But instead of testing production, I want to use a Looker development branch. dbt labs change. And instead of using analytics, let's use what I think will be dbt cloud PR, and it was 63, I think. Pull request 63, there we go. And so what that will do is actually check this staging data set against this Looker branch and tell us if they're compatible. So we can then merge both together and have full confidence that with these two pull requests together, we're not going to break anything. And as I said, this is manual today, but will be fully automated with a process that we're going to push out in the next month or so. And so that's really the last bit of this dbt integration that we're really excited about. Is right now we're good at testing, will this dbt change work with Looker production? And what we'll extend that to is, will this dbt change work with this corresponding Looker branch in a more automated way? And so you can see here, this branch with this data from this schema is fully passing. And so I could know now with high confidence, let's merge in the dbt code, let's have a dbt production run, and then when that dbt production run is done, let's merge in this Looker pull request, and we're off to the races. And that really is the dbt integration. We've got a bunch of other stuff in Spectacles that we'd love to show you some other time. And so if you're interested, by all means, get in touch. But this for the dbt integration is really how all of it works. And Josh, I'm going to ask you if I've forgotten anything.
No, I think you covered it.
Perfect. I'm happy to take any questions. Amy, I don't know if there's something else you wanted to talk about before the Q&A.
Yeah, let's see. Does anyone have any questions? I have a quick question while some other folks, I can see some folks are already typing in Slack. Josh, you had mentioned that you'd done some work and analysis on what are like the top errors, right? What are the mistakes that we're making in our dbt projects moving to Looker? There's the obvious ones about like renaming, probably the most common ones, right? I'm sure about renaming columns or tables that then your lookml project is looking for. What are some other errors that you see that might not be as obvious, or we might not be thinking about?
Yeah, for sure. So it's interesting when you start diving into the data, like definitely a lot of it is just someone put the wrong name for a column, reference can't be found. Then the next thing after that is syntax errors typically. So people not using the right timestamp or date function, or not putting the argument in the right place. You think about all kind of development and programming, these are the most common things, just typing things incorrectly. Then when you get into that a little bit deeper into the types of issues, access is another problem, people not having permission to query certain things, or not having the right even permission set up in Looker and things like that. And then there's some kind of Looker specific things like with parameters and filters. If you don't have them configured correctly, you can find unexpected errors. So these are all just things that like are very easy for human beings to accidentally introduce, and having something checking those things automatically for you just gives you a lot of peace of mind. Not to call out someone on this call, but Brian Huff, who's on this call, is one of our customers at Indigo Ag, and he had just joined the company when he started using Spectacles, and he mentioned to us that Spectacles was really helpful to him as he was getting onboarded, because his team was doing a lot of code review, and it was really useful for him to have an extra check as he was getting familiar with the Looker code base and getting comfortable with the kind of work the team was doing, to have that like backup system that at least these are going to run against the database. They're not going to break dashboards, and to know that as a baseline.
Awesome.
The other error I'd add, which is relevant to DBT, is data type 1. So we get a fair bit of, hey, you can't run date trunc on a variable character field. And so a timestamp's been cast to a string in some way, or was never cast from a string to a date, and people think it'll behave normally in Looker, and you just get a bunch of errors. So data types is a really easy one that people are semi-aware when they change column names to some degree, or at least some of the time. Data types people just think is totally innocuous changes that could actually have big downstream impacts on Looker and break like widespread things with a single change.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. That's, yeah, super interesting. Thanks for all of us to think about as we work in our across projects. I see that Jacob Adler has a question. I'm going to try to unmute Jacob so he can ask it about the roadmap. Oh.
Sure. I said,
Yeah,
what's the product roadmap look like for Spectacles after some of the features that you mentioned earlier?
Cool. Yeah, we are working on a lot of different, what I would call like quality of life upgrades to the validators. So we recognize that there are just certain cases where you want to customize the way things run a little bit more. One of these is with the content validator. So we already allow you to exclude content errors that are found in personal spaces. A lot of times teams don't want to check that. They want to check like the shared folder and the main company dashboards and things like that. And in addition to that, we allow you to only see the incremental errors that are unique to your branch, and not things that may already be broken in production. We're also working on folder specific stuff. So if you have a specific folder you only want to test, or folders you want to exclude, getting more granular control there. On the SQL validator, something we're excited about is we're working on actually incremental SQL testing. So right now you have a really big project, Spectacles tests all the dimensions in the project. So even if you only change one dimension, you might still have to wait for the whole project to run. And for some of our larger customers, that's just takes a lot of time. So we're working on the ability to only test things that are changed unique to your pull request, dimension by dimension, which we expect will speed up runtimes for a lot of people. We're also working on some things around data tests. So we think data tests are really cool. Of course, a lot of people are doing testing in DBT, as they should be, but in terms of your metrics themselves, Looker allows you to write they're basically table calculations, but they're just like DBT test statements that return true or false. We hope that people will use these more often. And so we're trying to encourage more use of that by making it easier in Spectacles to see what's been tested and to be able to click back in and explore the actual query result and things like that. So it's a lot of like kind of core Spectacles work that we're trying to do just to make the validators more flexible and work for more use cases.
cool. Yeah, we have another question in the chat. How have you collaborated with Looker and Spectacles thus far? Oh, how have you collaborated with Looker thus far?
Yeah. So when we started Spectacles, the ambition was not to like commercialize it or build a business around it at all. I think Josh and I frankly wanted free tickets to the Looker conference at the end of that year, and getting a presentation slot, having built some open source technology, was a good way to do. And so Josh and I, for context, Josh and I had been Looker customers for a long time prior to doing this, both pretty early on. And so we've always had some relationship with them. And I think our expectation to some degree was testing should live in Looker. They're not doing it, maybe they don't have a playbook for it, whatever it is, but we'd probably build Spectacles and show them a playbook for how they might do this, and they'd take the ball and run with it. And it would become part of the application because it was clear that it was valuable and whatever it is. And we presented at the conference that year, and the feedback from both Looker customers and Looker staff, both very senior and all the way down to more junior people, was overwhelmingly positive. But it became clear for a variety of reasons, I think incentives and other things, that this wasn't something that they were going to work on, that they understood it was valuable, but it wasn't something that they were going to prioritize in the short term. And we spoke with them about, okay, if we were to go build this, do you think it's something that we could, work closely with you on? And that's really our relationship with Looker. So we are a Looker technology partner. We've got the same relationship with Looker that other companies, Fivetran, Snowflake, others will have. I imagine, though I don't know this for sure, I imagine DBT Labs is the same relationship, I expect. But we have a really close relationship with both their product team and their sales organization. So we get a bunch of referrals from their sales engineers who recommend the tool. We speak very regularly with their product team to make sure that we're aligned, that we're not doing stuff that's duplicative in any way. And I think they see us as, particularly for their larger deployments, but really anything like embedded with Looker or hub and spoke model, multi-environment setups, as a core part of what they recommend people using these days. And so that's a very long way of saying we speak to them regularly and have a good relationship with them and continue to collaborate on both kind of customers, but also future features that we think are going to be valuable.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. Let's see. Anna, I see you just joined. Do you have a quick question? Or no? Okay, cool. Let's see. Any other questions? Oh yeah, you just noted that you were at that talk at the conference. Yeah, no, that's great.
It was kind of funny, we I think didn't brand our talk very well. It was some kind of jargony title about continuous integration, LookML development. And whoever was organizing the event clearly didn't think it would be very interesting. So they put us on like the smallest stage. And we were thinking, oh, I don't know if anyone's actually going to come to this talk. And I think just a testament to the community and the way that people feel about testing their work. And obviously everyone thinks all of their PRs have 80% errors. And then we obviously care a lot about testing, but it was cool to see the turnout and like people who are passionate about automated testing, making sure that their work is high quality. And we were really excited to see all of the enthusiasm around this kind of thing.
I feel like it was standing room only at that talk.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
And that was, Amy, to your original point, that was the last time Josh and I saw each other in person. Was November 2019.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Quite a while ago. Very different world that we're all in now.
For sure.
So we've got you all on the call. I mean, we've shared a little bit about our roadmap. I would love to hear if anyone here, either in Slack or on the call, has things they wish they could test or ideas for the ways that DBT and Looker could be more closely integrated. I'm curious to see what you all have come across as practitioners.
I see some folks typing. Let's see. Yeah. Does anyone, feel free for anyone to unmute themselves if they have some thoughts about what they'd like to see on the Spectacles roadmap or other things you'd like to see.
While people are typing, the one thing I will talk about a little is Josh. One of the things we're thinking about a lot, which I think this community will probably value more than others, is Josh has built a LookML parser that has allowed us to do a ton of really cool things with the project in the future. And I think one of the conversations that's come up in the Slack a lot is the organization of teams that use DBT, and is it hub and spoke? What is it? Center of excellence? How do we do self-service? All of that stuff, and allowing people to keep development speed really high, which I think is a key focus and conversation around all of these organizational structures as you build a data team that is comprised of tools like DBT and Looker. And one of the things that it isn't a DBT and Looker problem, it's a BI problem that is a problem, is that all of BI is really additive. It's you build this new model, you build this new view in Looker, you build this new Explorer, and very rarely is there this cleanup process that says, hey, we don't need this view anymore. We don't need this Explorer anymore. It isn't being used. It's whatever it is. And I know some of the team at Dutchy, I think, have done some of this on the DBT side, which I'd love Jacob to possibly talk about. I don't know where they are with it, but on the Looker side, what we want to allow you to do is develop quickly in DBT, develop quickly in Looker, and not have this huge back and forth around, is this in the right place, or should this be part of original Explorer, but whatever it is, there's some degree of conversation needs to happen there, but that ultimately you should be able to push something, and then if it's not being used, it should just get cleaned up automatically from your code base. And what's really cool about the parser that Josh has built and that we've been able to build some MVPs with is we've actually built some functionality that we'll be pushing out, I expect, later this year, that allows us to open a pull request for you that says these 4 joins, these 3 explores, these 7 view files aren't actually being used today in your LookML code. We'll delete them for you. We'll open up the pull request. We'll run the spectacles checks against it to make sure that they don't break anything. And then you'll just be able to, as the admin in Looker, say, hey, yeah, you're right. We don't need these anymore. Merge, go. For anyone who's done software engineering with a tool like Dependabot that just bumps up your requirements every time a new release comes out, we think of it very similarly as that. There's a bunch of stuff that is still a little manual in Looker that we think the user experience around could be much improved. And I think that's where we're going to spend a lot of time. So I say that, one, to fill time as people possibly ask questions, but also to prime future questions in case anyone has anything in that space. But yeah, we're imagining a world where we love Henry, the spectacles utility, but it still requires you to go in, remove code manually, make sure it's not breaking anything. And we think we can automate that whole process in a way that really allows you to move quickly and not worry about tech debt in quite the same way, because there is this thing that's coming behind you and making sure that you're not going to have an Explorer in your code that was created 2.5 years ago and hasn't been used in 9 months.
I have a question. Can I just ask you? We can have a sidebar too, but I'm curious about the API that you talked about for being able to, how you just have that little Python file to call the API to run the spectacles run. Is that open in the sense that I could say if I have a Dagster pipeline, can I call it from that? Or...
Yeah, absolutely. So you can, that API is open to the internet. So if you have a spectacles, like an account in the hosted solution, you can just create your suite in the host solution and then create runs from it from wherever. One thing that a lot of people do is if I've got a Dagster pipeline that's running dbt in production every day, it's possible that the first thing I want to do after that pipeline finishes is call spectacles and make sure that after I've rebuilt all my production models in dbt, Looker is still working. And so the last step can be, hey, go call spectacles and just let me know if anything that I've just changed in production is going to have a detrimental effect on Looker right now. And that's really big for teams overnight. Let's say you've got a 4 a.m. Dagster prefect Airflow dbt run. And you want to know before reports go out at 8 a.m. whether there's anything wrong there. Spectacles can just be the final step of that. And so we have a lot of people who use it in the dbt context here, like on a dev branch, but also just test like ongoing production code, which kind of ventures into the almost like data observability space rather than the pure CI space. And we venture through that functionality into that area.
Okay. Thank you.
I've just seen Jake's comment in Slack. No, we are not using dbt to Looker at all in our projects today, but I think the migration of descriptions from dbt to Looker, from the database to Looker, is something that we revisit basically quarterly as something that we want to tackle. I think we will. And Josh's parser has taken, one of the issues historically with this is the dbt, the things that programmatically wrote Looker code were very hard to keep things like comments in place and stuff like that, at least the kind of existing Python versions of them. Josh's parser does a lot of that for us. And so we are, I think, it's now a question of just implementing it rather than, I think we've tackled the known knowns and the known unknowns, or at least some of them. So it's something that we're not using it at all today. It is something we've played around with a fair bit. I think it will be something that we tackle in the future, but also if people are interested in collaborating on it, I think it's a piece of functionality that we're very interested in building. Because I think it is, Spectacles doesn't deal with documentation that much as a problem. We can leave that to other tools, but it is something that is clearly a problem between these two things. And I think for better or worse, you're seeing third-party tools become the source of all of it. Instead of syncing the two tools that you use already, you're pulling it up into a third-party tool and have to use that, which I think is a totally legitimate solution. But I think as much as possible, you'd like this to happen in the code base that you work in as seamless a way as possible. And I think it is, I couldn't commit to a timeline, but it is something that we think about a lot, which is, again, a very long way of saying, no, we don't use it today.
Let's see, we have time for one more question if someone's got one. Just have a couple minutes left. Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, Josh. Thanks so much, Dylan. Really, this has been a really interesting talk. I always see the spectacles bot show up in Slack saying everything's okay. It's been really great to see behind the scenes what all goes into that.